Good morning, Gold Coasters. My name's Maya Linnell and I'm thrilled to be a guest of the Gold Coast Library today. We've got some company. I hope you don't mind a bit of bird life. We live in southwest Victoria and we have a rural property, and I've just released my second novel and it's called Bottlebrush Creek. It's a rural romance. As I mentioned, it's set in the area that I live in, southwest Victoria, and it's all about Angie McIntyre and her little quest to bring her family together. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking a bit about the book, and then I'll be answering some questions from the Gold Coast Library. I've got my notebook here ready with all these wonderful questions. And I think I'll start by telling you a little bit about me. So I was a country journalist. I used to work at a newspaper in South Australia before I had children. And then after we'd finished building our own home, I decided to chase my dream that I've had since childhood of becoming a published author. So for me, that took the form of working through a manuscript and putting together a rural romance called Wildflower Ridge, which was picked up by Allen & Unwin and published last winter, 2019. So my new book, Bottlebrush Creek, came out on the 2nd of June. It's been very well received by readers, and I'm thrilled to see that people are really enjoying the idea of having a little escape to the country, especially during lockdown and COVID, when people haven't been able to get out and about so much. So the inspiration to write the story was based on the fact that we built our own house and we made our own bricks. It was a very big owner-builder project, and at the end of it I thought to myself, gee, that was a pretty lucky thing that our marriage came out unscathed, because it's one thing to do a little bit of renovating and it's a whole nother ball game to build a house with the man that you love. So I decided that that would be the perfect predicament to give to my main character Angie in the story. So Angie has a 3-year-old daughter called Claudia. Her partner Rob Jones is fly in, fly out. So he's been working in the mine sites in Western Australia for their whole relationship. And so they've been looking at different fixer-uppers around the country, and they find this beautiful little weatherboard cottage. It's on 200 acres. It's not far from the beach. The only catch is, as Angie discovers after she's done the look through and fallen in love with the property, is that it's right next door to her in-laws' dairy farm. So Angie hasn't had much to do with her dairy farming in-laws, and one of the things that she soon finds is quite difficult is that fine line between accepting her mother-in-law's help, especially with all things babysitting, and having her own, her own independence and sorting out her own way of doing things. So that's a really nice conflict. It's a tricky conflict, I guess, looking at those family dynamics, but it's something that I really enjoy writing about. So where I live here in southwest Victoria, it's quite chilly at the moment. I think it's about 5 degrees this morning, so my hands are a little bit frosty. I do have some lambs that I was hoping would be wandering in the background for you, but they're huddled up in the sunshine just over there at the moment. So we have a rural property. We've raised pigs, we've raised cattle, we've got some lambs at the moment, we've got a huge garden, we live quite close to the ocean, and I feel like it's a really nice type of lifestyle to be able to write about. So my focus is trying to write as much about what I know as I can, and I'm one of 4 children, so I found it fantastic to be able to put the McIntyre family in this story. So they have 4 daughters from a farm in Western Victoria, and each book that I'm writing focuses on a different story based on a different sister. So if we move on to the questions from the Gold Coast Libraries, the first one is, what inspired the McIntyre Sisters series? So as I mentioned, I really wanted to look at the dynamics of what happens to a family farm when it is all girls, and I really explore that in my first novel, Wildflower Ridge. We have Penny, who's one of the middle daughters, and she's living in the city, and she comes back because she's ill to the family farm, and there's some farm safety messages, there's succession planning issues, and in all my books I've got a heck of a lot of baking and gardening because they're 2 things that I really love. So our owner builder project was definitely ripe with inspiration for this this book, Bottlebrush Creek, and I like to talk about the different problems that Angie finds when she's dealing with tradesmen, because what I found out from our building project and speaking with other owner-builder women and ladies who've gone through renovations is that often there's this conflict where the tradesmen don't necessarily want to speak to the lady involved in the project, even though, as in Bottlebrush Creek, Angie's money is going 50% towards this project. So I want to explore that. We talk a lot about workplace harassment and office bullying and things like that, but what about on those grey areas where it's not an office environment but there's still quite a clear gender divide? So we explore that. We talk about the in-law dynamics. The dairy farming theme is quite close to my heart, because one of my best friends throughout primary school, she was from a dairy farm, and often on the weekends when I'd go for sleepovers, it was all hands on deck. You didn't have a choice whether you helped out at the dairy in the morning. So I'd go along, and it's such an all-encompassing lifestyle. So I really wanted to talk about that in the novel, and I guess shine a light and some appreciation for the dairy farmers and their 24-hour-a-day commitment to providing milk and cheese and butter for all over Australia. So that's one of the other themes that I wanted to explore, and community volunteerism. So Angie McIntyre in the story finds herself very easily roped into a heck of a lot of volunteer committees. And I think that's one of the things about when you live in a country area. As soon as you move here and someone gets word of the fact that you are really good at bake sales, or you're good at fundraisers and organising events, then suddenly, whether you like it or not, you're roped into being involved in these different things. So I talk a bit about that in Bottlebrush Creek as well. The second question, who do you write for and who will enjoy your work? So I write for Allen & Unwin, and they're a fantastic Australian publisher. I've got a wonderful publisher in charge of my books, and that's Annette Barlow. She does a really good job of choosing some great Australian stories. So I get to sit along the shelves with Fleur McDonald, Carly Lane, Nicole Hurley-Moore are some of the other ladies that write for Allen & Unwin, and we seem to just appeal to people who love good, honest stories about our rural communities. So anyone who likes a good yarn, anyone who likes cute pets, so we've got calves in this book, bottle-raised calves, we've got chickens. In my first book, Wildflower Ridge, I had bottle-fed lambs. So all different things that I feel like I can write from a place of experience. And so people who enjoy my work, I've had a range of different readers. So I've had some younger readers. I've had a 12-year-old who's read the book and loved it, right up through to my 92-year-old Nana is the first reader. My mum and my Nana read my work first. So a huge range of ages will get a kick out of diving into Bottlebrush Creek. So how much of you and your experiences in your stories and your characters? So this is a great question, because I do find that without even meaning to, I managed to sink a lot of my own experiences into my writing. As I mentioned, the owner builder project that we did certainly inspired a lot of the storyline. So with our owner builder project, because we were trying to do as much as we could ourselves, we were in there when it was we had someone come and help out put the slab down. We had people come and help, obviously, to do the plastering and the waterproofing, the things that needed the council sign off, so like the roofing and the electrical and stuff. But whatever we could do ourselves, we did. So we were in there painting, varnishing, grouting tiles, helping. We had a chap come and help do a little bit of tiling with us, so we'd sit there beside him buttering up the tiles with the grout. And so these are all different things that I really like to put through my stories. And then also, I think it's really nice to be able to write about the communities that I live in, and I've always loved living in small towns. We've moved around, we've lived in South Australia, we've lived in Victoria, but I guess the resounding theme is that it's always been small communities. And so I like to write about the issues that are affecting the people that I know. And anytime I'd pick up the newspaper, whether it's the Stock Journal in South Australia or the Weekly Times or the Stock and Land, each time I'd pick up those different newspapers, I'd see things about the milk prices and the dairy farmers having this amazing fatigue from, getting up at 4 o'clock every morning to milk their cows, and then, people are kicking up a stink about paying $2 for a litre of milk. So things like that are things that I've managed to thread through my novels. I also wanted to put in the bottle-fed lambs and the bottle-fed calves as well, because growing up in a country area like I did, well, we didn't actually have our own livestock, but all of my friends at school would always every winter have a different batch of lambs or a different batch of calves and chickens and eggs coming out their ears. So I really wanted to be able to thread some of those things through my novels, because that's something that I've enjoyed. Raising our own children is having that beautiful connection to the country, and the paddocked plate theory is something that we really enjoy here. So we've threaded that through. Also dahlias. I love dahlias, and poor Angie here, she hasn't had anything to do with dahlias. She's got a green thumb. She's from a family that has a beautiful garden full of roses where she grew up. But she soon finds that volunteer committees, her mother-in-law, who's very lovely and very enthusiastic, but she also dobs her into different community events. So poor Angie is loaded with a bag load of dahlia tubers, and she has to work out, what's the more work? Is it the community involvement of helping with the dahlia show, or is it actually growing the dahlias? Because they take a fair bit of work, and I love dahlias. I normally have a huge big garden just over there from where I'm speaking every year. So it's really nice to be able to put those things that I enjoy and I love into my books. How has growing up as a country girl shaped you as a person, as a writer? Yeah, so that's a really neat question, because I do feel when I was in high school, there was this amazing urge to, as soon as you finish high school, hit the city, go straight for the bright lights and get away. And I remember thinking, as a teenager, why would people choose to live in these small areas where people know everyone's business? You can't have someone else's car parked outside your house for 3 nights in a row without someone asking you, "Ooh, who's visiting?" or "Have you got a new partner?" or something like that. So as a teenager, I found that quite oppressive. But as soon as I moved out of home and moved away overseas for a while, I realised that I really liked it. I really valued that connection to my community, connection to that ability to go next door to my neighbours and say, "We're out of eggs, is there any chance I can borrow a dozen? And next time I go into town, I'll swap you back a dozen." So we're lucky we have a fantastic community here where I live, just like when I was growing up. And people will happily take you out on their farm to show you around, and you get to help pull lambs and help with different farming duties that might seem every day to someone who lives on a farm, but if you're not from a farming area, it's a real treat. So my husband's from a farming background in Western Victoria, with these gorgeous rolling paddocks, lush pasture, beautiful big thick red gum trees, and so I use that as my setting for Wildflower Ridge. I think it's really easy if you can write from a place that you know, so I can pretty much just close my eyes and go, okay, right, we're in Bridgefield, she's out in the paddock, what's she going to see? Okay, well, she'll have the huge big red gum trees that you can't even wrap your arms around the trunk because they're so big. Shaping me as a person, I think it's a really nice, this warm country spirit that you get, and community minded as well. Like I've got in the book talking about bartering, and we do a lot of that around here. So eggs are always easily tradable. We have our own fresh meat, so if a friend comes around, we'll send them home with a bag of sausages or a roast, which is really nice. And yeah, I think it's really gives me appreciation for the beautiful places that we have in Australia that aren't necessarily highly populated, but really special to live in. What advice do you have for budding writers? Well, this is a good one, and I've always got lots of different bits of advice. I'm only a new writer myself with only 2 books under my belt, but because of my journalism background, one of the things that I wanted to do before I decided to start writing a book was research the heck out of it. And I feel like that was a really invaluable way of, learning from other people's mistakes. So there are so many podcasts out there. There's the Talking Aussie Books by Claudia, that's a great one. There's the Rights for Women podcast. There's So You Want to Be a Writer. There's the First Time podcast by Writers Victoria. There's so many great podcasts. And in pretty much every one, the different authors will give a bit of a rundown of how they got their publishing deal, the pitfalls of that they found, things that they wouldn't do a second time round, and their advice. So I find that that's a really great place to find information. So definitely do your research. There was also some really neat footage on YouTube I found. Alan and Unwin recently managed to get a hold of some footage of Bottlebrush Creek coming off the printing press. So that's really neat if you have a look on their YouTube channel for how they actually print the books, which we watched over and over and over again because it's pretty fascinating. But similar to that, there's also lots of interviews. I think it's HarperCollins did this fantastic series for kids, and it talks about the different steps of getting a book published, and that was really neat as an author to work out what the heck is an acquisitions meeting, you know, how are people offered contracts, how long does it take people to write books. So there's lots of great ways that you can get inside information on how to go about it instead of reinventing the wheel. My other tip is to write about something that you know. So for me, it's country living, and that seems to serve me really well. And if that tripod's wobbling a little bit, it's because there's a little lamb just here wobbling past it. So I think writing what you know serves you well. I've also heard the expression, write what you want to know as well. So if there's something that really fascinates you, or there's a story that you're itching to tell, then you know that's something, if it's really sparking your own passion, then it's going to come through in your writing. So I quite like that one as well. And then read widely. So don't just read in the genre that you want to be published in, though that's very important. If you want to publish rural romance, you need to know what the general setup of the rural romance genre is. So obviously for me, it's got to have a country setting, it's got to have a happily ever after or a happily for now. So you know, you can't end the story with a cliffhanger and your main character being killed off, whereas in a thriller or a crime novel, that's completely acceptable. So you need to know what readers expect from the genre that you're trying to write in. And I'll just get this lamb out of the way. Come here, before he chews my tripod to bits. I also think it's important to have a social media platform. So in today's modern age, writers can't just write their books and hide away in their little office and never be seen of. You've got to really show people a bit about what you're about. So for me, you know, I've got pictures of my lambs, I've got pictures of the baking, pictures of my garden. My brand is Writer Baker Green Thumb. I'll regularly post things about that. So I think there's lots of different things that you can do, and heaps of different opportunities to research them as well. So hopefully that helps the budding writers, and also to keep going, because if you want to write a book, you've got to sit down and get 80,000 words on a page. For most novels, my contract states I need to have a manuscript between 80,000 words and 100,000 words. So if you don't sit down day in, day out and write that novel, it's never going to get published. Has COVID affected your writing routines, and how? Yes. Yes. So my writing time is when the children go to school. So I have three, I call them young children, but really they're not that young anymore. I've got children in primary school, and for me, my writing was always best from 9 o'clock in the morning until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That was my key time where I'd get down the best amount of words, and it was most productive. And of course, with COVID, the children were homeschooling for I think 9 weeks here in Victoria. So they only just went back 2 weeks ago, and now are into school holidays. So I only had a lot shorter time to write. I found it really tricky with everyone home, and my husband was home from work a bit as well. So it was quite tricky to stay focused, and I also found that I just had to lower my expectations of what I could possibly produce. So I knew that, you know, my normal word count of 2,000 words a day went out the window. It just wasn't happening. What do I like doing when I'm not writing or thinking about writing? Well, as I mentioned, I love gardening, I love baking. So my dahlia patch, I've just cut back all the dahlias. My roses, I've just pruned all of those. We've got about 60 roses on our property. It takes a bit of work looking after all the chooks. We've got about 20 at the moment, and they're laying beautifully, so we're getting a dozen eggs today, which is wonderful. Looking after whichever animals we've got at the time. The children, it takes me a fair bit of running around. I also love sewing. So I find it quite soothing to sit down with my sewing machine and, you know, put together something, whether it's a skirt, whether it's an apron, whether it's just a new peg bag. I find that quite relaxing. I love reading. I always have a book on the go, and I love audiobooks too. So I'm listening to Normal People by Sally Rooney. I'm also reading The Cake Maker's Wish by Josephine Moon in paperback, and I have a newsletter that comes out every month, and I usually have giveaways in there too. And this month's author spotlight is Josephine Moon. Her book came out on the same day as Bottlebrush Creek, so I thought, well, it was quite fitting to have her novel as well as mine in this newsletter. So sometimes I have a couple of books on the go. I've also started Darry Fraser's new book, and it's called Elsa Goody Bushranger, and that's set in South Australia in Robe, which is close to where I grew up, so that one's really good too. That's historical. How important are public libraries to you and your family? Public libraries are very important. So I think libraries are possibly the best council service that they provide. The library card is just like a passport to go anywhere. Often I've gone to schools to give talks about writing, and I get them to put their hands up and ask, you know, who's got a library card, and I'm so surprised when some of the kids don't have library cards. So I've been going to the library ever since I was small. For us, growing up in a small town in South Australia called Tantanoola, the mobile library used to come, and it was this huge clunky old bus, and it would have been a nightmare for the librarian to drive because it was really old, but as soon as you stepped inside it was just like a treasure trove. So we always loved the days when the mobile library visited, and I grew up just grabbing as many books as I could from the library, and they let me increase my limit because I was such a regular, consistent reader that they let me borrow more books, which is good. When I moved overseas to America, the library was one of the places that I felt most at home because I worked in this beautiful big house looking after 4 children in a very posh neighbourhood, and the library was just like this great equaliser here in our local community. When I had really young children, it was this one place that we could go when it was raining. It didn't matter what the weather was like, but we could always get out and about. So always very, very appreciative of libraries. And I'm really pleased to report also that my kids are bookworms. So they go in there, they go nuts for the Diary of the Wimpy Kid, the Arndo books. There's all sorts of books, and I can just keep on, you know, pushing them in new directions, which is great. Which other writers inspire you? So I'm really lucky. I've got a lot of fantastic friends who are writers. Probably kicking off with Victoria Perman, who gave the cover quote for Bottlebrush Creek, and she called it a heartwarming, funny and poignant story about the joys and heartbreaks of country living. Now, Victoria's an author, she's based in Adelaide. She's got some really great stories. She's got some more small town coastal romance style ones. She's got some great dual timelines that delve into historical. The Last of the Bonegilla Girls was fabulous of hers. So she's great. We've also got Ali Sinclair. She's a Victorian writer. She writes dual timeline, historical, contemporary stories as well. Fiona Lowe, she's from Geelong in Victoria. She writes these fantastic family sagas that are just so relatable. They could be easily your family or my family. Claire Connolly, she's an Adelaide author. She writes for Mills and Boon, and she has this amazing work ethic, and some of her days she can pump out like 10,000 words. It's just amazing for someone like me who some days it's really hard to get 1,000 words done. Claire has this fantastic way of writing fast and really lovely stories. And Brisbane author Tabitha Bird as well. So her book, A Lifetime of Impossible Days, was a really, really beautifully written, very raw, very heart-wrenching story that came out last year as well. And another Queensland author, Barbara Hannay, she writes fantastically. So lots of great authors out there who inspire me and write some beautiful stories. I think we're very spoilt for choice here in Australia. And then I think our last question was, what's the next big project for Maya Linnell? So at the moment I'm working on my 3rd book. It's contracted with Allen & Unwin to come out next winter. So the 3rd book is about Lara McIntyre. It's her story to save the general store in her small town of Bridgefield that she lives in. So that's a lot of fun. I'm working on that at the moment. About to go to my publisher in a couple of weeks, ready for the structural edit. I've just popped inside. Hopefully it's a little bit quieter so you can hear me read a little section from Bottlebrush Creek. So this little part of the book is about the first time around that Angie and Rob go to the Joneses' house for dinner. So it's the in-laws, it's right next door, and the relationship is a little bit strained. So they haven't had too much to do with John, who's a dour dairy farmer, or Rosa, who's a very eager beaver, lovely grandmother, depending on which side you look at it. So, tell us about your cottage, said Rosa, sitting down to eat. Have you got the extension permit back yet? I dropped it into conversation when I saw the mayor yesterday. He might give it a nudge in the right direction. Rob rolled his eyes. Nothing like keeping a low profile, Mum. Thanks. It's the least I can do, Rob. I'm just as excited about that cottage as you are. What colours are you thinking, Angie? It always looks so fabulous with a fresh coat of yellow paint. We've decided on duck egg blue, like a greyish blue, with white trim. Rob's father, John, cut his meat into neat little pieces. Rosa's brow furrowed. Greyish blue? That sounds a little maudlin, doesn't it? Yellow's such a cheerful colour. Rosa trailed off, her eyes tracking from the buttercup walls of her lounge room to the vintage lemonade posters either side of her range hood and matching yellow floral curtains. Angie's fork hovered a centimetre above her mouth as all eyes turned on her. She lowered the mouthful, hoping that Rob would pipe up, but he was shoveling in food as if he hadn't eaten in days. We think it'll look good, but who knows? Maybe we'll go and buy a few sample pots in different shades and see how they go. Oh, well, we're sure it'll be lovely, whatever you decide, said Rosa, placing another shard of pork crackling beside young Claudia's untouched beans. A lot of work to be done before you need to worry about picking paint, said John. Angie noticed Rob pause before slowly resuming his chewing. Oh, hush, John. They're on their way and that's the main thing, said Rosa. Maybe we'll be able to do dinner together every Sunday, she said brightly. Angie pushed the carrots and the corn around her plate, but before she could work out how to tactfully decline a weekly dinner arrangement, Rosa continued. And what about Christmas? We always have a fresh turkey from Mr. Huppert's, but we could live on the edge and get some fresh crayfish if you'd rather. Whack a tablecloth over a few card tables and we can invite your family too, Angie. And you can come to Mass with me if you like. John never bothers, but it's such a lovely tradition, don't you think? Angie sucked in a quick breath. Is it suddenly hot in here? Rosa's excitement and attempts to make her feel welcome were having the opposite effect. She hadn't discussed it with Rob yet, but she'd just assumed they'd do something at the cottage with her sisters and Dad. Was she really so selfish that she hadn't yet thought to include John and Rosa in her plans? Angie grimaced into her roast potatoes, knowing it was true. Rob's hand squeezed her knee gently. Steady on, Mum. We've only just moved in. Plenty of time to work something out. Angie nodded and drained her water in one big gulp, wishing for the millionth time her mum was still alive. Annabelle had seen the good in everyone, and she'd always been quick with advice when her daughters had asked for it. What would Mum have suggested about living next door to my future in-laws without being in each other's pockets? So there you go, that's a little taster from my new book, Bottlebrush Creek. I hope that piques your interest, and a huge thanks to the Gold Coast Library for having me and for listening in today. If you'd like to stay in touch, then I have a newsletter that comes out every month. I have an Instagram presence, I have a Facebook presence. You can find me at maya.linnell.writes on Instagram and Facebook, and my website is www.mayalinnell.com. So a huge thanks to everyone. Stay well. I'm sure you'll stay very warm up in Queensland, and hopefully I can come up in person and meet you all next year. See you later.